Well, I look at it this way, right? So I spent I look at my career as having three phases, right? The first phase, I was contributing fundamental knowledge, right? And a lot of what we do, I was a tenured professor writing papers on social engineering and deception and how people were getting deceived online. And I was doing this years before people really understood social engineering. Today, you go and use the word phishing or a Nigerian scam, and I've given talks everywhere from Indonesia to India, and people know what you're talking about, right? Back then, that wasn't the case. It was still a very new thing, and I've been working on that area of understanding deception and how it works on the internet in all its forms, social media, email, all that, and contributing this fundamental knowledge to it for almost 20 years. In between that, I kind of pivoted to the next phase of my career, which is a phase of advocacy. Because I was so early in recognizing the problem, I started saying, hey, trying to highlight the problem and the so-called solutions that I thought from a policy standpoint that we need to do. So I was, very early in my career, going back to around 2014, feels like a decade ago almost, when Sony Pictures hack happened. And I wrote about it on CNN. I was one of the first people to write about it in media, saying in a broad-based media audience, to a broad-based media audience, that, hey, this is a problem, and this is why this is happening. This is how Sony Pictures was hacked. That was the thesis that I wrote. It was a 800-word article, but basically the point I was trying to make is there's more to come. If this is happening now, if a sovereign organization, which has more tech than any other, many countries out there, Sony Pictures at that time in 2014, can be hacked by North Korea, where you can count the number of ISPs they have on your fingertips. If they can do it and cripple them, if you remember that hack, more is to come, and the cat's just out of the bag. And that led to a lot more advocacy on my part, where I started writing and appealing to policymakers to get into this space, to start doing some of the things that we're going to talk about later, which is educating people, not just adults, but rehauling our K through 12 education, because everything was going online without any protections. And I was writing about K through 12, about adults, about securing the weakest links, which is people, going back to 2014. So I got into this phase of advocacy, and I started getting more and more into it. I gave talks in the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress, multiple times, Naval Academy, Army Cyber Institute, and all these locations where I said, hey, we've got to do so. And as I was writing these articles and advocating, there were more hacks. There were ransomware starting to come out, and I wrote about ransomware. I was talking about what's coming next. And in a weird sort of way, everything I was writing was happening. And at one point, they were happening as I was writing about them. And that took another 8-10 years of my career where I was doing an advocacy push. More recently, I realized that, hey, you know what? There's only that much that we can talk about and problematize. Someone's got to solve these problems. And finally, I got to a point where a decade later, there isn't much being done in K through 12. I've been talking about it for 10 years. We're talking about cyber hygiene. I was one of the first guys to write about this concept of cyber hygiene going back to 2014. Again, in the media, it was picked up by all manner of news media globally. Everybody knows this concept, but nobody understands what it is, and nobody's really doing anything about it. These are all terminologies that are no different than using, big data, blockchain. They're just terms that people use without really doing anything about these things. And so I said, hey, you know what? If no one's going to solve it, I'm going to try to solve it. So that got me into this phase of saying, how do we change K through 12? And it's also personal. I have 2 children. So I was like, I see it firsthand, the problems that parents have, parents like you or I, you and I, where we're trying to, teach our children how to be safe cyber citizens, but we're not equipped to doing it, nor is the school system really helping. And so that's the 3 phases, right? So I went from fundamental knowledge generation to advocacy to being part of the solution rather than just talking about the problems. And all 3 are related. I do all 3. I still write in the media. I still advocate heavily. I still write articles. I still profess on fundamental knowledge generation. But now I'm shifting to this idea of solutions, which is how do we solve this problem? And what are the solutions I can create in my time with all the knowledge that I've accumulated?
You kind of touched on it, and I wrote this as a note after watching some of your previous talks. Do you see this? This isn't simply a matter of rolling out curriculum, within the schools. This feels like a multi-pronged issue as it relates to educating the children. It's how are the schools potentially involved in this?
Right.
How could the private sector potentially be involved?
Right.
But I also found myself wondering, do parents feel equipped to have these conversations? And
Right.
I thought it was even interesting you had made the analogy to sex education as that has evolved over time.
That's right.
But I do wonder if parents feel equipped to have these conversations with their children, and if they're not, who is? And
Right.
again, draw whatever analogy back to sex education you want.
Right. And if you really think about it, parents today, a lot of these cyber educations, if you want to call it that, right? Cybersecurity awareness. Let's just use that term, right? It's a term of art, but let's just use it as making children more aware of the threats of doing whatever it is that they do online, which is a lot of things, but we'll talk about that too. Much of that today happens around the kitchen table with parents who themselves are not very equipped for doing it, right? I mean, what we have seen with adults in organizations where people actually spend money to do this is the vulnerabilities are still pretty high. To date, I haven't seen numbers better than about a 10 to 15% reduction in total, security awareness. You can make people really aware. In other words, you can make them really aware, but there'll be 10 to 15% of your employees who will continue to fall victim to the same attacks, just in a different form. We have not been able to cross those thresholds. We think we have, or some will claim they have, but when we actually go and do these studies scientifically with controls, what we find is about 10% of the people always remain ill-equipped for dealing with it. Now, these are organizations where you're doing it every 3 months, sometimes every month, right? You have phishing pen tests going on every month. You have re-education literally every few months. Many parents don't even have that, right? Most of us don't have access to any of these forms of training or awareness. So the problem is, how are they going to teach their children who get technology earlier, who do things on technology that the parents cannot understand or even relate to at times? I was just looking at some statistics recently. I was looking at, something like private pictures, photographs, right? Now, if you're from my generation or older, we are very careful about our devices. We don't have, compromising pictures of ourselves because we didn't grow up with it on our phones or on our devices, right? Most of us don't. But the newer generation, right? If you look at people around in their 20s right now, many of them have a lot of compromising pictures of themselves, which they don't find compromising because they grew up with the technology. It's part of the social morals of the generation. And so I was recently reading, I follow a lot of these stories about sextortion attempts. It's a lot easier because if you lose your device, you lose everything there on it. And there are these stories of young men and women finding themselves in these compromising, sextortion scams, elaborate scams, which are not that elaborate. All they did was lost their device and everything was on it. So we need to educate that new generation, which a parent cannot, because they cannot relate to this reality. And we need to start this in K through 12. And I don't think the school system can do it either, right? We saw what the school system has been able to do, and they really aren't equipped dealing with this because they themselves don't have the resources, they don't have the skill depth. I mean, if you look at what organizations face and how much they throw on this problem to try to solve it, the school system can't do it right now. As it is, they don't have enough of the resources to do what they're already doing. Right? They barely have enough time in the curriculum to finish what they require, and they're not doing that well, right? Less people are interested in being teachers. Like if you look at the national statistics on teachers, post-COVID, fewer and fewer people are getting into wanting to be teachers and to, getting certified. So we have a problem with workforce there. We don't pay our teachers enough. We can't pay them enough to do security training. Imagine what a security person makes at a starting salary and what a teacher makes after tenure and 20 years of work, by which time they're too old to be teaching technology anyways. So we have a huge fundamental problem here, which I think the private sector needs to step in and say, hey, this is a problem and we're going to adopt it to try to create a solution that's going to be good for the entire nation. This is the next generation of the workforce out there. And I think every organization out there should basically step in to try to solve this, which is what we're trying to do as the Cyber Hygiene Academy right now.
So I definitely want to hear more about what you think from a private sector perspective can be done. I am curious, and I think we had this conversation, and I shared that information about North Dakota and their K20W initiative. Are you familiar with any other states or I guess communities that have taken a swing at this?
I think I have. I think Virginia has tried to do a pretty decent job. They have a cybersecurity curriculum. Again, when you look at the statistics on the extent to which these curriculum across different states are accessible, there's only about 10% of the population of students in public schools that have been able to go through this curriculum. Because again, the problem is not just having a curriculum, it's what? It's not just, hey, we need to have a curriculum. It's are we checkboxing something and saying, oh yeah, we taught them about passwords, we're done. Or is there more to it?
Right.
On the flip side, if you look at what some states are doing, right, talking about where these curriculum are going, if you look at Florida, for instance, and even New York right now has a bill banning devices in classes. So rather than take the problem on, they're saying, we're going to go back to prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
We know how that worked out in the 1920s. And that's even more dangerous, if you ask me, because once you say, I'm going to ban the devices, you can ban something these kids are grown up doing. You know, you go walk around any mall and there are little babies out there watching iPads and tablets. You're not taking that away from them when they come to school and say, well, you can't use it anymore. Well, good luck with that. So yeah, you know, some states are doing a good job. They have curriculum. What this curriculum is, no one knows. Unfortunately, New York, you know, also did a mandate where they said, hey, we're going to start teaching cybersecurity. I'm in New York, so I'm a little bit more familiar with you know, how the legislation here works. And I said they mandated cybersecurity curriculum, but no one knows what that curriculum is going to be. So this is a problem, right? Virginia is doing a good job with it. Virginia, apparently almost 70% of their classes have to have some cybersecurity content. 70 to 80% of their public schools should have it. When you look at access numbers, which is what percentage of students are actually taking these classes and actually learning from it, it's around a 10 to 12% of the total public school population. The other question is, when do we want to begin this, right? What age? There's a lot of these questions, and these questions are fundamental questions of science, right? At what age should we expose our kids to you know, good cyber hygiene? And also the what, right? This is, what is that curriculum going to be? Have we had that conversation? Have academics and researchers put in the time to come up with the data to say, well, you know, this is what we need to do, and this is how we need to do it, right? What's that how? So a lot of this who, what, when, how hasn't been clarified. So everybody's doing their thing, but they're all shooting in their own directions. We really don't have a unified understanding of the solution space.
Let's talk a little bit about the age appropriate piece of this, which I found interesting in previous conversations you've had around this, is and at least the example I know of in North Dakota, where it begins at kindergarten, the idea that is an appropriate time to potentially start something like this, because if we reach middle school and the education hasn't happened, then the ship has sailed. They're well down the road of being involved in social media and everything else. Speak to that a little bit about your.
Absolutely. When we looked at the data, so I've been doing national surveys, you know, and talking to parents all across the nation. You know, our surveys are focused on parents for the most part to say, okay, what are they doing in the household? How are they managing this? And you're absolutely right? I mean, kids, by the time they're in 3rd and 4th grade, already get used to devices, right? Most children have a smartphone coming into their life around 4th grade and 5th grade, which is middle school, by which time they have a device that is essentially is the lifeline that the parent gives them, but it's also the device that they have the world at their fingertips, and the fingertips of every hacker on them. It's too late and it's too dangerous. Kindergarten might be the right time to begin that process, to start telling them what it is that those devices mean to them, right? It's not just, hey, here's the device and, you know, here are the bad guys and, you know, stranger danger. It's, what are you watching? What's that content out there? How's the content being monetized? Who's the market there? You are the market. Every eyeball of yours pays someone's bill. How? Explaining that to a group of a generation of children who are basically just gazing at their screens, right, could do a lot to also reduce the impact of, you know, last week, I think, or the week before, the Surgeon General of the United States basically came up with, you know, asked for warning labels on social media, because he said that, well, the content is so harmful. Well, perhaps warning labels would be great. Perhaps warning them early would be even greater, right? This idea of putting a label on something and saying, well, we solved the problem now, is it's good, right? We try to do that with cigarettes, but people still smoke despite the labels. It's not the labels that stop them from smoking. It's how we change the perspective of the entire community of smokers. That's what made the difference. And going back to sex ed, it's the exact same thing. I talk about something related to sex education, which is, if you remember, if you remember the 80s and the 90s, we were dealing with another pandemic, which was HIV, right? If you remember the 80s and 90s, we needed to tackle this problem head on. And the way we tackled it really is through sex education. If you really think about what we did, it wasn't commercials that did it. It wasn't security awareness equivalent of HIV awareness alone. It was changing the perspective from the bottom up through sex education. So today, if you look at how it works, and I've looked at the polls and the data on this, what we changed is that, first intercourse, where a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman and a woman meet, when they have sex with a stranger that they met for the first time, people use protection. That singular act, which is when in doubt, wear protection or what have you, changed how HIV spread almost completely. It was one singular thing, but we had to change it from the bottom up. So today's youngsters who are coming out, if you look at polls that are being done, they're having sex less often and they're being more careful. It completely changed the perspective, the mindset that children have had coming out into adulthood. That's what we need to do with security. It's the same problem in a different way. It's a pandemic of attacks that we're dealing with. And we never think of it that way, unfortunately, because we always think of it as being a very low-level crime. It's not. It's got huge impacts, right? You look at any newspaper, there's always a story out there of some child out there who killed themselves or what have you because of a sextortion attempt, or because something was stolen, because of cyberbullying, because of kidnapping. All of these things can be avoided if we basically change that perspective starting very early in life and graduating that curriculum as the child evolves. So as they get older, we make the curriculum more and more intensive so that by the time they're in high school, we can teach them more technical skills so they're coming out prepared for technology. I believe, and this is my bias here, is I believe prohibition doesn't work. I believe that what you want to be doing is changing perspective, right? Being permissive with the right perspective is how we want to train our next generation of children. Taking away technology either makes them do it without us knowing what they're doing, or it reduces their ability to use technology, which is a force accelerator. It's going to make them better. It's going to make them sharper. We need to give them the technology, be more permissive, but give them the right perspective to understand it.
And within that need for perspective, I find it interesting. I think at one point you mentioned the differences between cybersecurity awareness and cybersecurity education, which I think the two terms are used very, very loosely throughout the industry right now.
That's right.
And I think there's a real need for a definitive line between the two, because one is not the other.
Right. And I'm going to be talking about this, later this year in August in Vegas, right around during Black Hat and B-Sides, which is, security awareness as an industry. It's got secondary meaning. The secondary meaning of security awareness is basically what, companies like out there who do security awareness training do. And there's no outcome to it, right? No security awareness company that uses that term will guarantee you awareness, which is the paradox of security awareness. No one will tell you, well, I'm going to make sure that you're not getting hacked because of this particular vector. They can't. Because what they're not doing is changing perspective. They can't guarantee that that perspective is going to change because that's not their focus. You're absolutely right? Education, and even I think education in and of itself is a pretty loaded term, right? What do we mean by that? Educating on what? Educating on what aspect of it? There are various things. There are biases people have. One of those things, I'm going to explain a term that I've developed, which is in my book, The Weakest Link, that was published last year, which is called cyber risk beliefs. We all have these beliefs about technology that we carry. That's not our knowledge set as much a risk belief that we adopt as we evolve into the use of technology, right? The best analogy of how technology today, the internet and computing works, is it's no different than fly-by-wire, right? So if you've ever seen a pilot flying a plane, the pilot is using a technology where his or her physical actions are getting converted into something else digital, that's being converted into something else digital, that's resulting in something turning in the wings, for instance, the ailerons or what have you. That's how the internet and computing technology work. What we see is not what's happening in the back end. The buttons we push have nothing to do with what's happening in the back end. But yet we form ideas about technology based on what we see in the front end. And that's how our biases creep up. So I'll give you an example. We just did a national survey. This is data that I get every time I do these surveys. I asked parents the same questions I ask people in organizations. Questions like, what do you think is more secure, a PDF document or a Word document? And invariably, what do you think the answer is? Not to put you on the spot, Corey, but
I'm going to say PDF.
You're going to say PDF. You're right, because 70% of parents and 70% of adults and 70% of the people, in fact, 75% of the people worldwide say exactly that. But then you ask them, why did you say that? The why will to reveal how people navigate technology. And I'll give you an example of what some parent told me. It's like, oh, it looks like a static screen. I can't do much with it, so it's got to be more secure. Well, that's got nothing to do with security, as you know. It's got nothing to do with security. Security is not in the screen or the staticness of the screen. It's the code and what's running in the back of it. It's the reason a lot of bad guys will use a PDF, because they know you will download it and open it. It's got nothing to do. A PDF, Word document, just because you can manipulate it does not mean a bad guy cannot. And that's how we form these ideas. I'll give you other example. So we have a lot of these. So if you go to my website, Vishwanath.us, I have an entire quiz with a cyber risk belief quiz, and you can see all these questions that are there. And these are beliefs that we form. We form it very early in life, right? Kids form it, parents form it, adults form it. It's very hard to break them because these are your governing principles of how you address risk. So it's not a knowledge issue as much as a belief issue. So the difference being, knowledge is something that you learn that's wrong. A belief is something you form, whether somebody teaches it or not. Some things are knowledge, some things are beliefs. So when we talk about education, educate on what? Are we changing risk beliefs? Are we changing knowledge? Right? Two different things. And there are many of these risk beliefs, right? So my book has a series of them that we talk about. Another example is SSL, right? An SSL is an indication of authenticity of a website. Right? A lot of people, 80% of the parents I ask this question, say, well, it is an indicator of authenticity. And it's not, right? An SSL doesn't mean a page is authentic. I can create a fake. There are many, rogue SSL certificates hanging out there. We know this. And there's a lot of these things, right? Text messaging. What is more secure? Is an SMS text message more secure or WhatsApp more secure as a messaging platform? What's the answer, Corey?
I would say WhatsApp.
WhatsApp is more secure, right? Because it's encrypted. Where a lot of parents are saying, well, it's not, because they look at WhatsApp, they look at Meta or Facebook, and they form these associations. You notice how this works. This isn't factually driven. It's a fly-by-wire phenomenon. It's what you see is what you think, and what you think is how you're forming these. And unfortunately, most of us just evolve with the technology, right? The whole move towards usable security makes these things worse. Right? When you have more usable technology, you dumb it down, the front end becomes simpler and simpler. We start believing the front end to be what it is in the back end. So you have to be careful in the way in which we do these designs. So that's one element of training, right? So when we talk about security awareness, what are we trying to change? Are we trying to change beliefs? Are we trying to change knowledge? But there's other things, right? People form bad habits, right? How do we change habits? That's a whole different world. What we do to change a habit is different from a belief or a knowledge issue, right? So think about habits. Some people have a habit of not having, every time a notification comes, they'll go and look at it, or they don't like to have a unread notification count show up, right? These are habits and rituals that we form. And I have a lot of fundamental research where we did these experiments, experimentally on subjects to see, are these people more likely to fall prey to attacks? And they are. And so there are habits, there are risk beliefs, there are knowledge items, right? It's what you know, what you are, how you do things. And then there's also how much attention we pay to things, right? We use a lot of heuristics. We use thumb rules when we navigate the internet, when we do things on the fly, when we do things fast. All of these could come to create vulnerability. So if you look at my book, the entire book, The Weakest Link, is about these issues where I say, how do we take these things and make security awareness better, like the function of security awareness better? And what we do is we use these as a diagnostic, right? And what we do is we say, okay, here's Corey, here's his vulnerabilities, right? Where are his vulnerabilities coming from? Are they beliefs? Are they knowledge? Is it a habit? What is it? Now you're like in a physician's office. The physician, you walk in, he's not just saying, here's your security awareness pill, go take it. He says, what's wrong with you, Corey? Let me listen to you. Let me see what's going on. And he does a diagnostic. And a diagnosis results in him saying, well, Corey, this is your problem. Arun, this is your problem. And here's your solution. You need security awareness. You need habit training. You need some knowledge training. Right? So to me, the problem with security awareness is a bigger problem, which is the industry has overtaken the problem and they've recrafted the problem based on the solution they already developed, which is some form of pen testing. Right? So we fit the problem to the solution instead of building a solution around a problem. So what we're trying to do with the Cyber Hygiene Academy is say, well, we know we have a problem, but we're not going to build a solution based on what we think is needed. We're going to go and find the problem. We know what the problem is. We know how children are. We know what the issues are. Let's build a solution or a series of solutions to educate them from the bottom up.
And that's obviously the role you see the private sector playing here. And it's
exactly. The role of the private sector, in my view, is, but the fear, though, however, is that the private sector is too quick to come up with a solution before they understand the problem. And that's the fear, right? That's the security awareness trap that I'm trying we don't fall into, right? Where they put the solution first and then build a science around it. We want to put the science first and build a solution around it.
So has this been well received? Or do you feel like this is going the direction you had hoped?
I mean, depending on what we mean by well received, right? We're trying to find a market. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a program that we give for free to a marketplace, to parents who can use it try it out on their children, parents and children. We have a survey going on right now where we're trying to identify the market where we can apply this. So wherever we are asking parents to fill this survey out, I'll share the link with you and you can put it in your show notes. What we're trying to say is, hey, if you're a parent out there, we know a lot of parents, having talked to them, want a security awareness tool for their child. They want their children to be cyber safe. They want their children to learn and get and acquire more cyber hygiene. We're willing to give that program on a test basis to these parents who understand how their children are doing. So we have a survey going out. We want to know what parents are doing, though. We also want to get educated on the problems that they're facing. What are they looking to solve? How are they having these conversations? What are the best practices that they're following in their families? Some parents are doing a better job than others, and some are doing nothing, right? Some are, expecting someone else to come solve this problem. So our survey is basically trying to say, what are these problems that they have, and how can we address it through our academy, through the Cyber Hygiene Academy? So, I would love it if you could share the survey in your show notes. But it's coming to the question of how well received it is. Every parent I talk to wants it. Every parent I talk to. Okay. The issue here is, can we talk to enough of the parents who care, right? Who we can get to and who are willing to say, hey, you know what, we want to try this out in our marketplace. I do believe that, school systems are harder to work with in this problem, right? Because they have their own sets of issues to deal with. The curriculum takes longer to evolve. By the time the curriculum gets accepted and evolved, attacks have already, just imagine a year and a half ago, we weren't talking about generative AI. Imagine what's going to happen in security within a year. In fact, we have a paper last year at Black Hat that we presented where we showed how generative AI can be used to make more compelling social engineering attacks. We already, presented it last year. This year, we have an app that we're developing that shows you how you can make those things happen. So technology is evolving fast. School curriculum just can't catch up. They can't be fast enough for this.
So you see the academy as an opportunity not only to present school systems, but potentially with the platform that they could introduce and curriculum. But you see this as something that could be used by parents as well.
That's
This
right.
is
So we have the parents we speak. That's a great question, Corey. The parents we speak to want something that they can use, want something that they can control. One of the things that we're starting to see in the last few years, at least, is that the amount of trust in the school system and in the school system's ability to solve some of these pressing problems is reducing. It seems to be an institutional mistrust that we see, but we see it in different walks of parenting today. Understandably, I'm a parent of 2 children. I can see that happen. So a lot of parents want a solution that they can control, that they can manage, that they can administer directly, that they can ensure works, and that they can ensure is just working on the dynamics of security and not reprogramming their children on some social issue, because all of those become political and contentious. So one of the things we're doing is we're going to the parents directly, and we're saying, hey, here's something that if you're interested, this is for your child. And we're also going to school systems and saying, well, if you're interested, give it to your children. This way, we want to ensure that it goes on to enough children out there. So if we can protect even one child through our program, I think we've done a way better job than doing nothing right now, which most school systems do nothing.
it does make me wonder what role parental control software plays in all of this. And this, I'm sure this is we could spend another hour talking about the good and bad of parental control software, but seems
I
like
have an answer to that, though. I may have if by parental control software. So when we've been doing these surveys, again, putting the science first and the need of the parent first, and this is why we talk to a lot of parents. We've been talking to a lot of parents. What we find is that parents do not want control software or don't want it as much. And the reason is that they want their children to trust them. And any software like a whitelist, for instance, at the most base level. So let's look at software on a continuum, right? Let's look at control on a continuum, which like some whitelisting at the base level all the way to abject policing at the top level, where the parent can actually see your screen. Let's put that on a spectrum. Not that there are the technologies that you can use depending on how sophisticated you are on the entire spectrum. The biggest fear of parents is that their children don't trust them anymore. And that's an understandable issue, right? Because then the child is doing things in their neighbor's phone or their friend's phone, which is even worse. The problem gets compounded, actually, which is why, going back to our conversation about the whole prohibition of technology, I find that to be more problematic, because what the children are going to do is they're going to use their phones outside of school or in the cafeteria or at times when no adult is in the room. I think that's worse. Every parent agrees with me. It's the reason why policing and these kind of technologies that monitor are something parents are not really interested in as much. And that makes sense, right? So on the top end, right, an abject policing software where the parent is completely monitoring every activity, they know their kids are going to find a way around it. And that's the end of that relationship. So I think parents want to be more permissive. I myself, as a parent, I'm incredibly permissive. And I understand why I do it. I would rather them know about it and learn about it through me while we're all in the room, while the adults are still watching, as against learning it from their friends who know less than them or just as much, or from some other adult who I don't know what they're doing. So this is the reason why in the Cyber Hygiene Academy, we want to show the parents what our program is, let them see the curriculum for themselves and say, okay, these are things I want to select for my child, and these are things I don't. And that's fine, right? So at least they get to see, and we'll say, well, these are the essentials that I think your child should know. And this is all we're going to cover. We'll show them the subject matter. We'll show them solutions. We'll show them how it works, so they know for sure that this is exactly, and they learn something out of it as well. A lot of parents are asking us, saying, hey, can you teach us best practices? Like, what do we do as parents? What are other parents doing to secure their kids? That's something I think there's a huge market out there if you want to look at it from a market point of view, but it's a huge need out there, right? I mean, we as a society today have got to step in, because schools are getting hacked. Every school is getting hacked. That I'm in the media. I'm sure you write about it. I've been in the news everywhere from Kansas to California to Buffalo. Every school system has been hacked. In other words, what does that mean, right, in today's world? What it means is most of these children, most of our children, most of the children who are in schools today, by the time they get into college, their data has already been compromised. The only problem is they don't know it. The only person who's blind to their entire event is them. The parents know it, can't do anything about it. You get some credit monitoring, and that's about it. What are the kids doing? Well, they're walking into the world with cars whizzing by them, metaphorically speaking, with their eyes closed. And our job is to open their eyes to that.
Boy, I don't think it can be overstated the need to be able to empower our children to be critical thinkers about this. It's unfortunately, I think in many cases it's been a can that's just kicked down the road, and I worry about the generation of kids that don't have parents that are being proactive about this, because, like you said, it's not happening in the schools. The schools themselves are overwhelmed, so there's an urgent need for someone to be proactive about this.
Absolutely. And I'm telling you, Corey, after writing about it and advocating it since 2014, right? Since December of 2014, when I first wrote a media article, that was my first media article. I was writing only science papers until then in CNN. And I said, hey, we got to overhaul K through 12. We've got to start working right there at the problem. And a decade later, a generation of children have gone through systems. And today, for the first time, if you look at every statistic out there, young people who are 18 to 24 and 18 to 34 are reporting more hacks and cyber crimes perpetrated on them, including, I think, IC3 data that I was looking at, than generations past, right? It used to be seniors who were getting compromised. Now it's those 18-year-olds whose data have already been compromised a decade ago. And I take it pretty personally, because a decade ago I was writing about this, which means we could have done something as a society a decade ago. We missed the boat for a whole decade of these kids. We've got to do a better job. We all have to. And every one of us who talk about it, write about it, technologists, entrepreneurs, we've got to step up. We're, the most powerful nation. We're 4th of July coming up. We're the most powerful nation in the world, bar none, right? We're the richest nation in the world, bar none. We do the least to protect our kids from that singular attack vector that's out there, right? A technology we invented, literally, right? The top 3 tech companies in this country, in our country, right? The top 3 tech companies have more in market cap than all of Europe put together. All of the European nations, their economy pales in comparison to, basically NVIDIA and Microsoft. We developed the technologies that's the core of our wealth. But we got to protect our children so they can be, good cyber citizens going into that use of these technologies and leadership, right? It's the next generation of leaders. We've got to step up and do it. If we don't do it, who's going to?
Well said. So take a few minutes and make a semi-official plug for the Academy, Arun, and how folks can get in touch with you and have a dialogue with you.
Well, okay. So Cyber Hygiene Academy is a very simple mission. Our mission is to protect children, right? Our mission is to protect them from any form of cyber threat. We want to protect them from physical harm, psychological harm. We want to ensure their psychological well-being and data protection. We want to protect them, and we want to build resilience. And what is resilience? We want to teach them how to react. We want to teach them how to respond, and we want to teach them how to resist any form of cyber threats, be it cyberbullying, all the way to a sextortion attempt, to a hack and ID theft, or deepfake, anything that's out there. We're trying to protect them, and we want parents to reach out to us. We want parents to reach out to us if they're interested in knowing more about us, and more importantly, in protecting their children, right? We have a short survey. It's a 10, 12-minute survey. We're going to post a link to it on your show notes. Enter the survey. You can reach out to us. All our contact information is on it. We have a website, cyberhygieneacademy.com. Visit us. Tell us more about us. Reach out to us. Tell us what you want. Tell us your stories. Tell us how you're dealing with cyber issues, how pressing it is, and what the best practices are that you're doing. You can do it through our survey. You can reach out to me directly. Or we've got to solve this problem. We got to make sure that this generation doesn't get past us, right? It doesn't get past without our training.